Welcome to this special webinar organized by SLIM, Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing and the Management Club. You may be wondering why we have chosen life with new variants. There are almost 5,000 new variants have come, the variants of interest, the variants of concern. Today, our eminent speaker will take you through the complete landscape of COVID and also the vaccines that are happening in Sri Lanka. So, as you know, within the last 3-4 weeks, the Sri Lankan government has done immensely well, showing that almost 50% of the population has got the double dose, and almost 60% of the adult population has got the vaccine, either 1 or 2 doses. So we had the hats off to Madam also. You have been in the front line and helping our industry a lot. Thank you very much, Madam, and all the paramedics and all the doctors who have been helping us. So today, the SLIM has taken this wonderful initiative, SLIM and the TMC, to conduct this special webinar. So may I welcome the President, Dr. Pradeep Edward, to give his speech and welcoming Madam. Pradeep?
Yes, thank you, Riza. Good evening to all the participants. As the chairman of the management club Colombo, I take this opportunity to welcome all members of the management club and also members and participants of the National Institute of Marketing, Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing, for this great timely initiative that the two bodies took as a decision to have for the awareness of his memberships and also for the student member base of Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing, right? Because it is a very timely topic. Why I say is because we have been hearing to so many scenarios, so many concerns about the COVID-19 and how things happen, right? But we have the privilege today of listening to a very eminent speaker, Dr. Danushka, who is an immunologist. I think this is a very rare specialty, and more than being a rare specialty, delivering a presentation of this nature is very relevant to all professionals who are going on with their day-to-day careers and day-to-day office life, right? So actually, it is. I really should thank Dr. Danushka for taking, because this was scheduled end of the month, but amidst a busy schedule and lot of government activities she is involved in, she cancelled some other events and gave this opportunity to the two professional bodies in the country. So thank you very much, Dr. Danushka. I think it's a pleasure to have you here. And also, just to highlight about the speciality of being immunologist, it's I think one of the things that people really now hear a lot because of the COVID vaccine, and now all people really are very much concerned about what the immunity is about. I think all these days people didn't even know what the service which is done by consultants of this nature, right? Because actually these are the hidden heroes of the country. Very few in this speciality as well, because these are the consultants who do all the background work and all the hard work sometimes to get things together in giving the platform for all the other consultants to give treatment and to to make sure that patient management is done in a professional manner. So I think this is a good opportunity for everyone to gather some knowledge and also to direct some questions to Riza, who is another expert in this area. I think he So I think thank you very much, Riza, as well for coming up. I think first we did a very timely one with the management club when the vaccine came, the importance of the vaccine with Professor Suranjit, and we had very good feedback for this. And now here we are with another very important area. So I take this opportunity, especially thanks Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing for playing a huge role in this event, and I thank Mirini Fonseca and Chamil Wickramasinghe for coordinating this event, and Madam President Tilanka Abewardena and the Vice President Mr. Nuwan Gamage for taking his time to be here. I think Tilanka and Nuwan have done a great job along with the Slim Expo and the Council to conduct so much of national events. And I think both of them are real digital specialists in the country as well in the field of marketing. Has also given a lot of inputs to the Sri Lankans of how to conduct digital activities during a turbulent time like this. So I won't take much of time, and I hand it over to Nuwan Gamage, the Senior Vice President of the Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing, to say a few words before we start the session. And thank you very much again, and let's have a great session. Thank you. Over to you, Nuwan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pradeep Edward, one of our prominent past president who had at SLIM. So actually adding Dr. Pradeep mentioned, we are going through a very turbulent time in the country. As a marketers, actually we are facing many challenges, marketers and sales professionals. I think we are the set of people always facing these challenges to go to conducting the business operation. As a national body of marketing in Sri Lanka, aligning to our vision of strengthening the nation effort towards the economic prosperity in Sri Lanka, we have had our next 5 years to develop future-ready marketers who can sustain and contribute to the economic development of the country in the post-pandemic social, behavioral, and economical changes. And finally, that motive leads to develop a future-ready Sri Lanka. So even during the pandemic situation, even when it comes to education and membership and all the division at SLIM, so we did a fantastic job and operation while launching SLIM Research Bureau, where we can support to the most affected SME sectors, business operators, and as well as SLIM Marketing Watch, and launching data-driven marketing professional program also, which is giving insights and data to take your decision in marketing and sales operation. And apart from that, we ran a couple of another very good webinar series with the business leaders, couple of business leaders in Sri Lanka, and not only Sri Lanka, from overseas as well. And as a professional marketers, we have to use our business and marketing acumen very wisely during this pandemic situation to contribute to the economical growth of Sri Lanka. I think, in the other hand, as Dr. Pradeep mentioned, peoples like Dr. Danushika and all the, we call them as in Sinhala, Suva Viruo. So always supporting to make this country to take away from the pandemic and balance the situation and their level best. I think they are contributing much more than us. And also I must take this opportunity to thanks Dr. Danushika joining with us today with even your busy schedule. And then we don't know when we will be able to go back to our normal life we had before, because day by day the pandemic situation is becoming very unpredictable, and with that actually we may change so many challenges in the future also in our business operation. So with that motive in mind, we partnered with the management club to conduct this Life with the New Variant webinar. To organize this, actually this forum is mainly for giving opportunity for our members to clarify their doubts about current pandemic situation in Sri Lanka. That's why we have taken this the relevant person to talk about that, and who is having very frontline experience about endemic pandemic situation in Sri Lanka. I believe that this webinar will be a successful endeavor for the both organization, evoking the sense of resilience during this trying time. I won't take much time, and thank you very much all of you who has joined today. And Risa, I'm handing over this entire presentation to you to carry out from here. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Nuwan, and let me I think we had almost 20 minutes from the time. So let me introduce Madam. I have introduced Madam several times in several forums. And thank you very much, Madam, for obliging and coming on a Sunday evening and presenting. Thank you very much for that. And Dr. Danushka Dasanayake was graduated her MBBS from Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. And also completed her Doctor of Medicine in Medical Virology from Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. She was specially trained in immunology in the Department of Immunology at Oxford and also at John Radcliffe. Presently serving as an immunologist in Kandy as well as Colombo MRI. And she has more than 15 publications in peer-reviewed journals. And she's a dedicated undergraduate and a postgraduate trainer in biochemistry, molecular biology, and biotechnology. And she's a board study member in MSc in Immunology attached to University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Madam, for joining with us. The floor is over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Riza, for the introduction, and Dr. Pradeep and Mr. Nuwan for the warm welcome. Let me try and share my screen. I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, Madam, we can see. Madam can put full screen.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the topic given to me today is COVID-19, life with new variants. So it has been more than 20 months since we heard about this novel coronavirus, and it has been almost 1.5 years since it was declared a pandemic. And this is what the world looked like during the week starting from 30th August to 5th September. So as you can see, many countries continue to report COVID cases in high numbers. And the WHO has basically divided the world into 6 regions: the Americas, Africa, Eastern Mediterranean, Europe, including Russia, Southeast Asia, Western Pacific, including China. So when you consider these areas, the numbers are increasing in the Americas. There seemed to be a reduction in the numbers in Africa, Eastern Mediterranean, and the Southeast Asia. And the numbers are static in the Europe and the Western Pacific regions. This is what happened since the beginning, that is December 2020. So as you can see, there had been many waves, and each time it looked as if things were getting better, along came a new wave. And mutations or the appearance of variants have contributed to this. Natural for a virus to evolve and develop mutations and start producing various different variants. So at this very minute, there must be more than 1,000 different variants that are circulating across the world. But all of these mutations are not important. Only the ones that make the virus more infectious or threatening tend to dominate. So this appearance of mutation is higher when there is high transmission level. So that's why we need to keep transmission at a minimum so that mutations will not evolve. So that is basically one of the reasons. So there are other reasons such as preventing severe illness, reducing hospital admissions, and so on. But apart from that, it contributes to development of mutations as well. So when we consider a new variant, we think of properties such as transmissibility, disease severity, and the ability to evade vaccines, medicines, and diagnosis for us to call it a variant of interest or a variant of concern. Now, if a variant has genetic markers, that gives us a clue that these mutations can lead to increased transmissibility, disease severity, or they can evade vaccines, medicine, and diagnostic tools. Then we call it a variant of interest. So these variants of interest are followed closely, and we see how they evolve in the real world. So there are some, I have listed out some important variants of interest that are currently being followed up in the world. So eta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, those are name of few variants of interest right now. And when there is clear evidence of significant impact on transmissibility or severity, then we label it a variant of concern. So far there have been 4 such variants of concern: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. And all of these have special features that make it more transmissible or that made them become the dominant strain. So these are, I have listed out some of the mutations that help the coronavirus spread. So all 4 variants show an increase in transmissibility, disease severity. The alpha and delta show increased risk of hospitalization and risk of reinfection. There is no risk of reinfection compared to the original coronavirus or the Wuhan strain that we saw initially in the alpha variant, but all the other 3, there may be a risk of reinfection. And so far, none of these variants have had any significant impact on diagnostics. So this is how the variants have been reported throughout the world. So as you can see, alpha was reported from 194 countries, beta from 141 countries, gamma from 92 countries, and delta from 174 countries. So if you look closely, you can see alpha, beta, and delta being reported from Sri Lanka. So are there any other variants that were reported in Sri Lanka? There have been only few cases of beta. So there wasn't any transmission in the country that we saw with the beta. But this B1411 variant, or the Sri Lankan variant, this is labeled the Sri Lankan variant because it was sort of unique to us. This is a strain that was there initially before alpha variant came into the country. So this variant caused a very mild illness where most of the people were asymptomatic, or they had a very mild sort of like upper respiratory tract infection. And that variant B1411 was replaced by the alpha strain. So this is how variants changed over time in Sri Lanka. So you can see how in April 2021, alpha became the dominant strain, and within a short period, delta took over. This is not limited to Sri Lanka. This was seen in other countries. Now, if you look at United Kingdom, you can see initially in July 2020 until January, October, perhaps beginning of 2021, the EU1 strain was the dominant strain, and then it was replaced by the alpha strain, and later on the delta strain took over. Transmissibility of alpha variant. So initially it was in December 2020, there were reports suggesting that this alpha strain, or B117 strain as it was called earlier, that it is more transmissible. And within 3 months of its emergence, it became the predominant circulating strain in the UK. So by January, they found out that there was a 75% increase in transmissibility of B117 variant than the original strain or the Wuhan strain. So when it comes to Delta variant, in June in UK, they predicted that a Delta variant is 60% more transmissible than the Alpha variant. So it was very much more transmissible than the original strain, and 60% more transmissible than the Alpha strain. So it soon, as predicted, became the dominant variant in the country. And another important feature that was found is that the viral load found in patients were 1,000 times higher than the original SARS-CoV-2 strain. So this indicates that it has a higher capacity to transmit the disease. In addition to this, there is a very short incubation period of about 48 hours in Delta strain. And the virus has a better fit with the receptors and a better fit with the respiratory tract epithelium, so that it is very efficient in establishing a disease. So if you compare this transmissibility with other strains, as I mentioned before, you can see the figures being compared with the original virus or the Wuhan strain. So if a person was infected with the Wuhan strain, that person could infect 2 other people. So when it came to the alpha variant, a person who is infected could give the disease to 5 other people. And Delta variant, if a person was infected, that person had the capacity to give it to 5 to 8 people. So this means that Delta is more transmissible compared to the other variants that we saw earlier. So if you compare that with other viruses that we know of, mumps, if a person infected with mumps, that person can give the infection to 12 other people, and for measles it's about 18. So it is not as bad as mumps or measles, but definitely it's worse than the other variants that we saw. So the Delta variant in Sri Lanka. So if you listen to the reports that are being published in the country, especially from University of Jawaharlal, they have found 4 new mutations in the Delta variant that is found in Sri Lanka. So one variant is unique to Sri Lanka, and there are 3 other variants that are present in other countries. 2 not very widely distributed, and 1 that is seen on a lot of other countries. So how the impact of this the mutations on the transmissibility or the disease severity, we don't know yet. But researchers have taken it up, and there will be many studies that will look at how these mutations impact the Delta variant. So the Delta variant has largely replaced Alpha variant, which was there. And now it's about 96% of all the variants that are out of the sequence, the viruses that have undergone sequencing, about 96% have been Delta variant. So the next question is, will this Delta variant be replaced by a different virus? Now, people are very much concerned about newer variants, and the question is whether those newer variants are able to replace Delta variant and cause a more severe disease. Now, if you look at these figures, now compared to the original strain, the alpha strain was considered to be, or the alpha variant was considered to be 1.5 times more transmissible than the original virus. And the Delta strain is about 2.5 times more transmissible than the original Wuhan strain. But if you look at the gamma, beta, and epsilon and many other variants, they are not as transmissible as Delta variants. So the risk is there, but it is unlikely at this point that another variant will replace the Delta variant in the near future. So even if something comes, it might cause a severe disease, it might cause a milder disease, but the spread is still more with the Delta variant. So the role of the vaccines. So there have been many vaccines to combat this coronavirus, and some platforms we were seeing for the first time. So this RNA vaccines have not been used in humans before this. Before we started using the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. So it was entirely a new platform. And then even the viral vector vaccines, there were vaccines that used the same platforms, but they were not so widely used before. Inactivated vaccines have been in use for so many years, and we know a lot about them. And these protein-based vaccines are coming into play only now. So RNA vaccines, many people had worries initially whether this vaccine can have an impact on a person's genetic composition and whether it can cause various problems in the genes. But this mRNA is a very unstable fragment and it will not stay in the system for a long time, and it can't get incorporated into the genetic sequence of a person. So therefore, these RNA vaccines are not dangerous vaccines. And out of all the vaccines, they were the most efficacious in preventing symptomatic COVID infection. So viral vector vaccines, this was used widely in Sri Lanka, the Covishield vaccine, which has an adenovirus vector. And then the Russian vaccine or the Sputnik V vaccine, again, it has an adenovirus vector. So these vaccines are also safe, and this adenovirus is a non-replicating virus, so that it cannot cause a disease in the person who's been given the vaccine. So of course, inactivated vaccines we have used for a long time, but the problem with some of these vaccines are you need repeated boosters to maintain the immunity. But by incorporating newer adjuvants or things that would make the vaccine more efficient, people are trying to improve the efficacy of these inactivated vaccines. So protein-based vaccines, as I said before, it is not widely used yet. And even DNA vaccines were approved, but they are not widely used as yet. So what determines the protection given by vaccines? The vaccine itself. So as I mentioned, whether it's RNA vaccine, viral vector vaccine, inactivated vaccine, and so on. And the time since vaccination. So sometimes you might find with time, the immunity to the virus may wane. So time since vaccination is important for the protection. Also the variant. So if a variant comes that can evade the immunity conferred by the vaccine, then that will not be very effective in controlling the virus. And also your immune system, in the sense that if a person has a weakened immune system, they might not be able to produce enough antibodies or cells that will control the infection, and it might give a lower protection. So how well are the COVID-19 vaccine protecting people? So a lot of the data are on mRNA vaccines, because those are the vaccines that are used in most developed countries. So CDC in June, they have said that mRNA COVID-19 vaccines reduce the risk of infection by 91% for fully vaccinated people and 81% for partially vaccinated people. And in addition to that, they also found that if someone who is vaccinated, either partially or fully, the chance of that person spreading the vaccine to another person was low. The virus was 40% less detectable in their noses, and the number of days that it was there was also less. So partially or fully vaccinated were 66% less likely to test positive for the SARS-CoV-2 infection for more than 1 week in comparison to those who were unvaccinated. So again, there is definitely an advantage even if you are partially vaccinated. So the protection offered by the vaccine is not 100%. So there is always some sort of a risk, but if you now look at this figure, now if you look at the 80-year-old, the risk of severe disease is brought down to the level of the same risk as a 60-year-old who is not vaccinated. But still, it's a significant drop in the risk. So you can see how everything is relative. But again, for all age groups, there is a definite benefit. So now we are beginning to hear of people who have got both doses of vaccine still falling ill. So why is it? Is it that the vaccine is not working properly, or the vaccine quality is poor? So what is the reason? So if you look at this figure, if you see a situation where 1 million people, out of them 92% are fully vaccinated, there is still 80,000 people who are not vaccinated. So if you calculate the chance of them being infected with COVID and the chance of them being admitted to hospital, about 160 people will require hospital admission. Now, if you look at the other arm, 920,000 people are fully vaccinated. And if you still calculate their risk for developing the disease and their risk of hospital admission, then there will still be about 110 hospital admission. So that means about 270 people are still likely to be admitted. So if you look at a scenario where only 70% are fully vaccinated, 300,000 are not fully vaccinated. So if you apply the same calculation, here about 600 people will require hospital admission. So out of the 700,000 who are fully vaccinated, again, about 84 will require admission. So again, about 684 people will require hospital admission, but the number of admissions in the vaccinated arm is more if you just look at the number in the scenario where more people have been fully vaccinated. So this is sort of like wearing the seat belt. Now, most of the accidents, people who sustain injuries were wearing seat belts at the time, but this is not due to a fault of the seat belt. It just means that so many people, the majority actually, had been wearing seat belts. So there is definitely a benefit in getting the vaccine, and it will definitely reduce the number of hospital admission. Another problem with this hospital admissions is that the health facilities or the ability of a country to provide healthcare, that will be saturated very soon, and you need to have that capacity in place to manage COVID successfully. Booster doses. So people are now thinking of booster doses, and there is a little confusion about what a booster dose is and what a third dose is. So a booster dose is given to fully vaccinated people. So they have developed a good response to the vaccine. But when the vaccine response or the immune response starts to wane, you have to give a booster at that point so that it will boost the immune response. Now, if you try to give it too early, what will happen is, again, the amount of antibodies will go up, but that doesn't mean that your immune response is boosted. It just means that your response is better. So if you boost it properly, the duration and the duration and probably the quality of the response will be better. So some people, especially those who are immune compromised, may not be able to produce a good immune response even after 2 doses of the vaccine. So in such people, they may require a third dose after the second dose to produce a response. Now, this is different from the booster dose, where the person initially had a response to the vaccine. Here, the person doesn't make a response to the vaccine unless a third dose is given. So all of us which will eventually need boosters depending on many factors. So these factors may be the interval between the two doses, what vaccine was used, whether the vaccines were mixed, whether it was homogeneous vaccination or whether two types of vaccines have been given. So many factors will decide whether we need a booster and when we need a booster. So some countries have already started giving boosters to elderly people, especially those people who have received a single dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. But few countries, including Israel, Austria, Hungary, South Korea, and US, they are offering these booster doses more widely, 4 to 9 months after the last vaccine dose. So the next question is, do children require vaccination? Now, at present in Sri Lanka, only people above 18 years are eligible for the vaccine. So what about the children? We know that even children can fall in. We know that a certain percentage of children will end up with complications. But before we start vaccinating children, we have to consider whether it's safe to give the vaccine to children. So in UK, there is a joint committee on vaccination and immunization, and they have declared that in people aged between 12 to 15 years, the health benefits of vaccines were marginally greater than the potential known harms. So that means if you consider the benefit of getting the vaccine and the harm that can be caused by the vaccine, the difference is only very marginal. So still, they are very selective about who will receive a vaccine. So in UK, only children who are clinically vulnerable to COVID-19 and children who have sickle cell disease or type 1 diabetes, or those who live with adults with an increased risk of serious illness from virus are eligible for COVID-19 vaccine. But in other countries such as the US, France, Denmark, Italy, Spain, Poland, the vaccine is being used more widely in children. So how this performs, we have to wait and see, and always we have to take into consideration the benefit and the risk of vaccine. So what about boosters in Sri Lanka? So we have looked at research that was carried out in Bahrain and Middle Eastern countries. So all of them have looked at the vaccines that are used in Sri Lanka, that is Sinopharm, Pfizer, Sputnik, and AstraZeneca. And all of them have indicated that the fatality rate and severe case rates have gone down due to vaccination. So that means the vaccines that were used in the country are very good vaccines. In a study published by University of Sri Jayewardenepura, they found that around 7% of people aged 60 years who got the Sinopharm did not produce antibodies. So therefore, it was suggested that maybe they require a third dose with a vaccine such as the AstraZeneca, Pfizer, or the Moderna vaccine. But you have to keep in mind that Sinopharm is a very good vaccine and it has given a good response in about 95% of people who are vaccinated in Sri Lanka, and it's highly recommended for those aged between 80 to 60 years. So it doesn't mean the vaccine is inferior. It just means that there might be issues in a certain sector of the population which we need to address. Also, antibody formation may not occur in patients who have received transplants, who have cancers, patients on strong medications that we call immunosuppressive medications, or who are undergoing dialysis. So they too may benefit from a third dose. But for people over 60 years who received Pfizer, AstraZeneca, or Moderna, we expect them to have a good protection for about 6 months, and they may require a booster dose only after 6 months from the last dose. So this might be applicable to all of us. Now, at the moment, there is no way to determine how effective the vaccine has been. So this is not limited to the country. This is the same all over the world, because one thing we can look at is we can look at the amount of neutralizing antibodies that were produced by the vaccine, but that is not the only indicator of a good immune response. So we might miss with this even the B cells or the antibody producing cells that can retain the memory and become effective or become activated when a person comes across the virus. And also it doesn't look at the T cells in any way. So these parameters are missed. Even if you do your antibodies, even if they are low, you might still be protected, as we don't know how to assess the response in people as yet. So is COVID-19 here to stay? So there are many driving factors. Immune escape, so that means if new variants come that have the capacity to evade the immunity, both conferred by the vaccine or that is after an infection, then we might have fresh waves. And waning immunity, that means once the immunity starts going down, the virus may become more transmissible. And uneven vaccine distribution. So certain countries might have enough vaccines, certain countries might not have enough vaccines. So this uneven distribution, even among a country, might lead to more cases being in the country. So we say no one is safe until everyone is safe. So that's why most of the developed countries are making sure that the poor countries are also receiving vaccines. Vaccine hesitancy. Now, this is more common in developed countries, and there are several factors why a person is reluctant to take a vaccine. So one is confidence. A person doesn't have the confidence to go and take the vaccine. They don't believe in the vaccine. They don't believe it's doing anything good, and they don't believe that it's helping people overcome an infection. And they have issues about the quality of the vaccine and about the production and various other issues. And a second reason would be convenience. You want to take the vaccine, but it's not convenient for you, so you delay taking the vaccine. And the third factor is complacency, where you might not consider you have the opportunity to get the vaccine, you have a good vaccine, but you don't think it's important enough to waste time on. So these are some of the factors why vaccine hesitancy is there, and it is seen mostly in developed countries. Lack of political will. So people might want the vaccine, but no one might bring down the vaccine for people to have, or else they might not be very concerned about the other interventions that need to be in place to reduce transmission. Animal reservoirs. So if the virus is retained in some sort of animal reservoir, then it might lead to lasting virus in the community. So these are some of the factors that may drive COVID-19 to remain in the environment. So if there is a good vaccine that can cover all the variants or the mutations, and there aren't any animal reservoirs, then probably the virus could be eradicated. So this is an unlikely scenario at present, because at present we don't have a vaccine that works 100% on all people, and also it's very difficult to achieve 100% coverage or a high enough coverage to attain herd immunity in the community. And this eradication may not be possible according to the current data we have. If the vaccines are not good enough and it can't block the transmission, and the coverage is not good enough, and the vaccine can, even after the vaccine, people can still get severe illness, then that means there will be severe illness in the community for a long time. However, if the vaccine can block transmission up to an extent and it can prevent severe illness, then the vaccine will stay in the background without being a huge problem. Now we have experience, we have other viruses that are in the background, like the influenza virus that comes up all of a sudden and then it dies down naturally. So that is called becoming a virus becoming endemic. So that means it's there in the environment, but it's not a huge problem. So it looks as if we are heading this way and the pandemic will eventually turn into an endemic rather than it becoming eradicated. So if we look at the measures across different states for countries adopting an elimination or close to elimination strategy in pandemic state, you can divide it into areas during pandemic state, transition state, and the endemic state. So initially in the pandemic, non-pharmaceutical interventions such as travel restrictions, border control, isolation, contact tracing, quarantine, and stringent restrictions, testing a lot of people, those were very important in the early part of the pandemic. But with the introduction of the vaccine, there is a way where we can ease on these non-pharmaceutical interventions. So if we try to do all these things very early, it might cause the another wave to come up. So you have to do it in phases. You have to do it step by step and go towards the endemic state. So during endemic state, you might be able to carry on with your normal day-to-day activities, but in from time to time, you might still have a little bit of outbreak here and there. So till this virus becomes endemic, we have to avoid crowded places, avoid close contact settings, and enclosed spaces. So these are the main 3 C's. And if you look at a place where all these features overlap, then the risk is highest in such places. So regardless of your vaccine status, you have to still avoid these 3 C's. So we have learned that good ventilation and masking can help reduce illness and death from a range of respiratory viruses. And also past pandemics have led to massive changes in the way we live that we have come to accept as normal. Now, for example, we are used to staying indoors with our doors and windows closed to keep mosquitoes out. And also we are very much used to trying to get access to clean water to eliminate typhoid and cholera. So these things we have learned and we have incorporated into our day-to-day lives. So likewise, certain practices we have learned during this pandemic, we might need to incorporate into our lives and carry on as normal as could be. So maybe one day we might be able to return to the world we know. So I will stop my presentation there and I will be happy to take questions.
I actually rather like to see the last slide, madam, and the world as we knew, and we all want to go there fast, I suppose. That was a nice slide. And as madam mentioned, more than 75% transmissibility in the Delta virus with more than 1,000 times the viral load. So we can imagine the fatality of the Delta virus. Madam, the first question I'll ask from the topic itself. What are the effects of the new variant? Will it affect the diagnosis? Will it affect the treatment? What are the effects of it, madam?
So actually, it has not affected the diagnosis. So still we are able to use the PCR that we know to diagnose the virus, and also the antigen tests that we have been using. And of course, the diagnostic tools are improving. I mean, every day you find better diagnostic tools, and there are PCR assays that can straight away detect the variant as well. So far, none of the variants of concern have led to this problem of difficulty in diagnosis. Initially, we saw in the alpha strain what we called S-drop. So one of the genes that we used to detect COVID was the S gene, and we did not see this in the alpha strain. So that was why we initially, I mean, before even we sequenced, we knew that alpha was here because there was a S-drop. But however, it could still be detected by the methods that we have been using. And also, if you talk about the vaccines and the variants, the neutralization capacity may be a little less in the Delta variant out of the variants that are present in the country, but still it gives the vaccines give a good neutralization effect. So it has not become a major problem so far.
So, madam, as you mentioned, moving forward, we may need a booster for a certain part of the people, maybe immunocompromised people, or maybe elderly age. So what is that supposed to be group? What is that group supposed to be actually?
Yes, so many factors, we have to look into many factors before we decide who gets this booster. So at the moment, now I have been talking about boosters and third dose, and I mean, this even medical professionals finds a little difficult to relate to. So boost is where you try to improve the immunity that you have already achieved. Whereas third dose is you are trying to achieve immunity in a person who never really achieved immunity. So it's two different things. So we might need to give a third dose to people who have weak immune system, say people who are taking various drugs for cancers, for various autoimmune conditions, who have diabetes, maybe. So people like that, they may require a third dose, but the other people, they might require a boost at some point, but this has to be timed properly so that it can actually boost the immunity. So if you try to give it too early, now there is a trend in the country where people try to go and do an antibody assay and try to find out whether they are immune or not. But all that can say is that you have developed some antibodies. Whether all those antibodies are functional, we don't know. And we don't know how much of antibodies we need to have for it to be effective. So there is no point in just doing random antibody assays. All it will tell you is that you have responded to the vaccine. So there are certain markers that you can't see with these assays, such as immunity gain through activation of T cells, and how many B cells, memory B cells are there in your system. Those things you can't actually see. So, so boosting is all about improving the immunity in a person who's already immune. So you have to time it very well, because otherwise you might not achieve what you set out to, what you target. So at the moment, we have set boosters only to people who are maybe over 60 years old, and maybe who have poor immune system and more likely to have waning immunity.
Madam, moving forward, now we are corporate peoples, we have business meetings, business travels. So how do we go about? Do we need to do it in a biobubble way? If it is a seminar or something, do we need to carry out in a biobubble way, or can we wait in a place that is completely closed up without the mask, vaccinated people? So how we should have this moving forward on the corporate sector, how we should have this biobubble of having meetings and business travels? How do we have that?
Okay, so vaccination doesn't mean that you are not getting infected. You can still get infected and you can still give it to someone else. So it is very important that if you are meeting in an enclosed space, that you adhere to your personal protective things. That is, you have to wear your mask, and you have to maintain distance. Those things you have to do anyway. So doesn't mean that you have to stay in a bubble, but it just means that you have to so there is a chance that if you're fully vaccinated, that you have asymptomatic infection, or that you will have only mild infection that even you might miss. So it is very easy to give it to someone else in that kind of scenario. So it's important that if you want to meet in a place where it's very well ventilated. And another thing is something that people always forget. We say if someone is sick, for them to stay home. Now, most of the cases that we have seen in hospitals among healthcare workers, now even in our departments, we see sometimes people who are fully vaccinated, although they are asked to stay home when they are ill, they keep coming to work because they try to attribute whatever the symptoms they have to something else. So people say things like they went home late last night and had a bath very late, so that's why they have a runny nose, and things like that. So you have to consider yourself to be infectious if you have even a mild symptom, and then try to stay out of everyone else's way. I mean, if it's something like that, it will go down very soon. But if it is not, I mean, even if it's COVID, it will still go down. But the good news is that if you're fully vaccinated, you will not be infectious for a long time.
Madam, there is a question from the audience. Going back, does vaccine enhance mutations? Is it understood that virus always mutate to survive? Thus, vaccine should enhance mutations.
This is, now I was talking about vaccine hesitancy, and now one of the reasons people say is that when you are vaccinated, a stronger virus may come, and it will sort of be more dangerous and create more problems. But the point is, with or without vaccines, the viruses will evolve. So we have to keep up with the vaccine. And so most of the time, it has not been so there was one instance where a school teacher in USA, she read out just a section of a book without her mask. This person was not vaccinated and ended up infecting 26 children. So that means now what happened there was the adult who should have been vaccinated was not vaccinated, and the person who should have been wearing a mask did not wear a mask. So it's most of the time it has been not adhering to the vaccine or the other measures that you're supposed to take, rather than vaccine that has led to more transmission. So certainly if a variant is able to escape neutralization by the vaccine, then that is likely to have a survival advantage. But refusing the vaccine, thinking that it will lead to emergence of a more virulent strain, is again not advised, because anyway it will lead to more transmission, and more transmission means more variants naturally.
Madam, this is regarding children. So most of them are parents here as well. So we are talking about this silent hypoxia. So they say after the COVID being infected in children, you have to be careful for about maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So can you kindly explain the complications of a post-COVID on a child, madam?
Yes. So most of the time it has been mild infection in children, but there have been instances where they have had severe infection. So this severe infection, again, it's kind of it's a gray area where certain things overlap, and you don't really know whether it's something like Kawasaki disease, or whether it's acute COVID, or whether it's multi-system inflammatory syndrome. So things like that. So what happens in this coronavirus, when you get infected, sometimes you might be affected without you realizing it. So that means we call it happy hypoxic. So you're hypoxic, but you are still, you don't feel anything. So you, appear to be normal. So you can, in such a situation, if you overexert yourself, you can run into various complications. So that is why it is advised that a person rest when they are ill, and this is applicable to children as well. Now, when it comes to these, the other complications, so it's sometimes very difficult to determine what actually, which condition it actually is. So the best advice would be, if you are suspected to be infected, if a child is suspected to be infected, follow them up properly. Don't let them exert themselves. And even if you sometimes do everything by the book and do everything right, still you might run into problems. So those things can't be predicted. But the important thing again is not to delay medical attention. So sometimes people, even among adults, that had been the case. So initially we saw television reports where the hospitals were congested, people were not getting enough attention. And downside of that was some people were very reluctant to come to the hospital. So by the time they were admitted, so there was not much that could be done for them. So especially in children, it's very difficult to decide when you need to take the child to the hospital. But the slightest doubt, I would advise seeking medical attention. You are muted, Riza.
What is your take-home message at this moment, madam?
Yes, my take-home message is, one thing is, I strongly believe that even with vaccination, you still have to take things slow. I mean, you can't forget about the other measures that are there, that are in place to protect you. Because people now, they are under the impression that once they get vaccinated, everything is well with the world and you can go about as you like. But I think that is a false belief. And until you're told that it's safe for you to go out without a mask, you have to always wear your mask. And so sometimes it's very sad to see that people, so if you look at the incidence of COVID infections, most of the infections have occurred in indoor settings. So you see people on the road nicely wearing their mask, but the moment they come indoors to the office or to their house, they remove the mask, and that is where most of the transmission have taken place. So I still believe you need to be very careful with your during your day-to-day activities, and it is important that you keep those around you safe as well as yourself. So even if you're vaccinated, you have to still stick to the basic principles until you're told that you don't need them any longer.
So, madam, one last question. When will it be the normal? When will it be normal? Like, because most of them are predicting like it will become an endemic, as you said during the discussion as well. It's about to become an endemic. So at least when?
Yes, so that is quite difficult to answer. Now, if you look at a country like UK, the number of cases they are reporting is still increasing, but they have sort of eased their restrictions based on the fact that not many people require hospital admission or not many people are dying. So that means the protection offered by the vaccine against severe disease is very good. So, so to return to the normal life, as you say, we might not need to eradicate the virus. We just have to reach a balance where even if you are infected, you don't end up in the hospital or an ICU. So, so it is very difficult to think of when it will happen, but with the current restrictions we have, I think it should be, I mean, we will come to some sort of a balance very soon.
Thank you, madam. You gave a fantastic landscape of the present COVID situation in Sri Lanka and the vaccination and where we are heading to, and a very important take-home message as well. Thank you very much, madam, for your valuable time. And it's been a great pleasure having you. And we almost had 120 participants. It was a really cracking session, madam. Thank you very much. And at the same time, I'd like to thank the president of the TMC, Chairman Dr. Pradeep Edward, and the members of the TMC, and the SLIM president, Tilanka Abhivardhana, and Vice President Nuwan Gamagi, and the council, EXCO, and the CEO and the staff. And special thanks to Mr. Chamil and also Mirani Fonseca. Thank you very much, madam, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining. Thanks a lot.